Hi, everyone. Welcome to Food Talk with Dani Nierenberg. Today, I get to chat with someone I really admire, Maximo Torero, who is the chief economist at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. One of his many roles at the organization is to work with governments to develop and scale solutions for more sustainable, inclusive food and agriculture systems. Maximo, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
No, nice to see you, Dani, and a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you. We have a lot to talk about, sir. The state of food security and nutrition in the world, the SOFI report was recently released, and I'm really interested in hearing what it shows, especially with the complete dismantlement of the U.S. Agency for International Development. What are you seeing with hunger around the world?
Yeah, the first thing is to understand that this report is reporting numbers for 2024. So it's before the big shock that is coming because of the reduction of USAID support and US support and other developed country support. But what the report shows for 2024 is that there is a reduction of the level of hunger. The prevalence of hunger between 2022, which was 8.7%, went down to 8.2% in 2024. And the number is around 673 million people which are in hunger. So finally, we start to see that the numbers are starting to improve. And this is basically driven by two major changes, one in South America and the other one in South Asia, especially India. So in South America, mostly Brazil,
Mhm.
Dominican Republic, and so on. And in the case of Asia, is the case of India. No?
So, Maximo, we were finally seeing good news, and I know it's hard to look into the future, but we're already seeing some of the impacts around the globe of the cuts in international aid, especially from the United States. What do you expect the SOFI report will look like next year?
So I, of course, always try to hope that the SOFI report will continue to show improvements. Our target, especially in Latin America, is to achieve SDG 2 by 2030. The problem in this report, which brings a lot of heterogeneity, is Africa, no? Where African numbers continue to deteriorate. And if we project the number by 2030, 60% of the people in hunger will come from Africa. And we're talking of 60% of 512 million. So
Wow.
Africa has been the region that has not improved. On the contrary, it has deteriorated. For 2024, 20.2% of the population is in hunger. And that's where I see the major impact of the reduction on ODA and humanitarian support from developed countries will happen because it's not only support to the agri-food systems by itself, but it's also support to the health sector, it's support to the education sector,
Right.
all the different sectors which are crucial for the agri-food system to be able to provide and to reduce hunger and to improve nutrition. So again, my expectation, unless things change, is that this will have an impact. Now, it's important to say that this also, when you always have a negative side and you always have to look for the positive side.
Sure,
And
sure.
the other side of the coin is that the African continent has to change and has to start prioritizing better their public expenditure, has to use better the money that they get through
Right.
different donations through the IFIs or through loans in a more effective way to target these policies. And that's one of the core messages of this report, that it's time for Africa to start to show that they can also change this negative trend and move forward. And because it's a continent that have this amazing institutionality, no, the
Right.
CARAP process. So they know what are the priorities, they know what they want to achieve. The fact now is that the governments need to take action and need to find a way to resolve this gap of support that they are not going to have in the next years.
At the recent UN Food Systems Summit, we all heard from African leaders who seemed, like they wanted to support more investment in food and agriculture. And so I hope that comes true. What are you hearing from your contacts in sub-Saharan Africa? Do they, are they sort of taking the lead right now?
I think that there are countries that are starting to do this transformation in the Food System Summit Plus Four. What was very important is the presence of the private sector. The private sector was very active and showing a lot of interest because this is a region that is basically organic. It's a region that has not used too much fertilizers. It's a region that has an enormous potential in terms of the agri-food systems. But it doesn't go by itself. It has to come with the institutionality behind, with the governments doing the correct policies, and of course, with ways in which the region can drive the areas where they need their investment for this
Sure.
to be reflected. One of the things that we do in our hand in hand initiative, exactly that, is trying to help them work with them to identify through territorial approaches which are the areas where agri-food systems can make a difference and to identify which are the gaps and the investments that are required to reduce those gaps so that you can release this potential. So I think that will be essential for this region to be able to accelerate. And finally, there is also this huge gap of financing, of climate
Mm-hmm.
financing,
Mm-hmm.
where I think this region could benefit if we start to attract more climate financing towards the agri-food system.
I want to talk about the climate crisis in a minute, but I want to go back to two countries that you mentioned, both India and Brazil. And in a recent op-ed, you wrote that India has played a decisive role in global progress. Can you talk about the changes that the country has made to reduce hunger and what other countries can learn from them?
Yeah, so the two countries, let me talk about both of them. I think in both cases, in Brazil and in the case of India, what we are observing is two different types of sets of policy actions. One is social protection,
Mhm.
which includes, of course, cash transfers, but also includes school feeding programs, cash transfers for work, and so on and so forth. And the other one is investments in increasing agricultural productivity. In both countries, this has happened at different velocities and different stages. Specifically, in the case of India, what we have seen is that there has been a significant improvement in the targeting of their policies that
Hmm.
had a lot of problems in the past. And the social protection programs that they have in place now with the digitalization of the identity of the beneficiaries, which now India is totally digitalized, has helped enormously to fine tune that. Of course, still
Sure.
they need to do significant work in improving access to healthy diets. No? We were referring that around half of the population don't have access to healthy diets. So they have improved in terms of production of cereals, but they need to diversify the portfolio of foods. And that's where the big transformation that needs to happen in India is needed. In the case of Brazil, social protection has been always been there for many years. They improved significantly also the targeting. They also use digital technologies, face recognition to identify beneficiaries. But they also have put a lot of effort in improving family farming, but also,
Right.
of course, production for exports, agro production for exports in cereals, where they are the key exporters in the world. So both of those activities, I think, help to support the supply side, which lowers the prices, but also help to support the most vulnerable populations through the social protection mechanisms.
Thanks for going through all that. I do want to talk a little bit about going back to the Sophie report, what's happening to women around the globe. It looks like from the report that the gap is widening for food security for women versus men. What is happening? Why are women affected more by hunger?
Yeah, that's something that was shocking in this report because normally we have been seeing that the gap between men and women was shrinking. But since COVID-19, the gap increased again because the most affected people were the female relative to the male. That's because the activities that were most affected in COVID-19 because of the closures were the processing part, no?
Sure.
The end of the value chain where most of the females are the labor force that is being used for processing, for packing, for cleaning, and so on and so forth. And that is now again increasing. So there was an improvement after COVID-19 despite there was a big spike during COVID-19, then there was a significant improvement. But in the last years, we're observing again a slight increase. And that's something worrisome. That's something that we need to
Yeah.
find ways again to change. And we have produced a report of women in the agri-food systems where we clearly mention the policies that we should target to be able to reduce these gaps.
What kind of policies should we be targeting?
For me, when we talk about empowering women, it's not just an issue of power in making decisions. It's an issue of having assets so that you can make real decisions, an issue that you have more access to income. And that is related to assets, property rights, titling, in which they are also part of the production resources to be able to create income and to make economic decisions within the household. There is also issues of inclusion of similar salaries. So it doesn't make any sense, given the same skills, that women are paid less than men. That's
Right.
discrimination. So we
Right.
need to find ways to equate the salaries between men and women, constant the human capital characteristics. So those are the types of policies, and also to create technologies which are adaptive to women. If we're going to
Mhm.
do mechanization in agriculture, of course, we need to adapt the machinery so that women can also use it properly and can profit from it. Clearly, we know that women are excellent at paying their loans and so on and so forth. There is a lot of experience on that, and that we need to scale up, no? So part of the risk scoring mechanisms to access to finance needs to take into account the repayment history and needs to take into account that women should also have access to finance. And that's super important because it's surprising, but even up to today in the formal agricultural sector, access to finance for the
Right.
agricultural sector is very restricted because the financial system doesn't understand too much the seasonality of the agriculture and also the
Right.
risks behind agriculture.
Right. Why do you think countries have not sort of invested in women as much as they have in sort of their male counterparts?
That's a difficult question, no? I think there are several issues, no? One is, of course, lack of information. And that's the job that we have to do is to bring data, separating female and male so that we can bring evidence. Evidence, also analytical evidence on issues related to segmentation of markets,
Or
issues related to the difference in wage gaps, is something that we are trying to bring and is something that we put in place. And the historical institutionality of male dominance on titling and on assets ownership is something that needs to change. And that's something that we need to accelerate. So I think we have significant evidence now. We have to increase bringing more evidence, but I think governments now need to start to resolve these type of problems through market-oriented policies. We are not looking here at not market-oriented policies. Of
yeah.
course, in some cases, because the gap is so big, in a period of time, we need to create some support and some subsidies and special conditions, but that's something that the market should be recognizing in the future.
Absolutely. In the same way that women are impacted by, not just hunger, but the climate crisis, financial instability, lack of education, youth are also being impacted. Can you talk about what the Sophie report found about youth and hunger and youth in our food and agriculture systems?
Yeah, we did several studies, not only on the SOFI, but also we issued this year the report on youth in the agri-food system, no?
Hmm.
And what we show there is that youth are significantly affected more relative to other generations in terms of climate. But we also find that this is the sector that can be the most reactive and can be the most active in terms of increasing the resilience. And then the other thing which is super important is that the agri-food system is a huge employer.
Right.
And the supply of young labor force, especially in continents like Africa, is creating a significant challenge of lack of jobs for these young generations. No? And here is where this transformation of Africa that is required
Hmm.
should take advantage of these young skilled people that have a different skill to the old generations. They complement each other, but the younger generations are more qualified in terms of digital technologies, in terms of numerical analysis. So if we make this agri-food system more attractive to this sector, I think we can gain a lot. And that's where we need to put significant efforts. No?
Can you talk about the sort of investment that's needed for young women farmers and girls and getting them interested and attracted to some of these, higher paying jobs in agriculture?
Look, I don't have a number of how much we need to invest in this, but I think any action that we do in terms of financing the agri-food system needs to incorporate this type of policies. I think it's central that we take advantage of the huge human capital potential that we have in females and in young people to be able to add value to the agri-food system. It's like you have an amount of capital there that you are not using properly, no? So
Right.
how we can realize that capital and make it have the returns that they're expected to get, that by itself will shift your GDP in agriculture substantially, no? So we need to find ways to attract them so that we can empower them realistically with better wages and better access to assets so that they can realize their economic potential and increase their returns.
Sure. Maximo, we've been talking a lot about the investment that's needed, but obviously, there's a link between inflation and food and nutrition insecurity. And I'm wondering if you can talk about sort of the impact that global inflation is having on food insecurity right now.
Yes. Look, one of the major issues of this report is to show that we have heard a lot about inflation, no, and the potential impact of overall inflation. But this report tries to separate what we call food inflation from other commodities, from global
Hmm.
inflation that
Hmm.
includes non-food elements. And first, it's important to understand that when we refer to food inflation, we're not referring to the FAO food price index. which
Sure.
is looking at commodity prices, no? Wheat, corn, maize, soybeans. In the case of food inflation, we're looking at the final products that you consume in the supermarkets, in the retail stores, and the shops. And what we found is that the food inflation increased significantly more than the global inflation. What
Okay.
that means is that people that have low incomes and their share of income is mostly expended in food are having a real effect in terms of what
Right.
they can eat and they can afford. And this food inflation start to increase after the period of COVID because of the recovery, and is because of the fiscal policies and the monetary policies, expansionary monetary policies that shift the demand towards food commodities, which increase prices. And then it was exacerbated on the supply side because of the war in Ukraine and increasing the input prices, especially
Right.
fertilizers and other inputs. That increased the cost of production and reduced the supply. So then you have bigger demand, low supply, the price will go up. And that's what we face in this report. No, a significant problem of access to a significant problem in terms of the capacity of governments to respond to these type of policies and to come up
Mm.
with a solution to the problem that we were facing in terms of the food price inflation. Now, it's interesting to also to look at the difference across countries. No, there are countries where food inflation has been not linked to real wage increases,
Right.
meaning in real terms the wage decrease, and there are countries where food inflation was resolved by increasing real
Mm.
wages.
Mm.
Just for example, the case of Mexico or the case of Dominican Republic. If you look at the evolution of real wages, basically remains constant, meaning that they were able to compensate for the food inflation. But there are many other countries where this has not happened, and therefore the capacity of consuming has been deteriorated significantly. No, now what that means, what food inflation means, it means like a 10% increase in food prices will imply a 3.5% increase in moderate and severe food insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
A 10% increase in prices will also imply 4% in severe and moderate food insecurity for women. So the difference is bigger for women
Sure.
than for men. And when we look at other more structural indicators of wasting, severe wasting of children under 5 years, it could go up to 5%, 5.5% more. So the impact of food inflation is direct into hunger, more in women than men, but also direct into severe wasting.
Yeah, and but Mexico and the DR have shown that if you raise wages, you can help prevent this, right?
That's one way to do it. Minimum wages, of course, in those cases that help because the population that we want to target is the population which is in the tail of the distribution, not the poorest population. And by increasing wages, of course, you are compensating for that deterioration of your real income. And that's what you want to do. No? And that's what we observe. I just came from Dominican Republic and present those results. And clearly there were policies of the government to increase wages during this period to compensate the consequences of this inflation, but also specifically food inflation.
That's great. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the impact that tariffs from the United States, the impact that that will have on food prices, on hunger around the globe.
Yeah, look, when we look at the tariff issue, so there are several conclusions that come immediately. Any increase in distortions to mobility of food will reduce resilience of countries, especially food importing countries. It will reduce the efficiency of the allocation of the resources in the world and also the allocation of natural resources in the world. Because at the end of the line, trade is a consequence of our natural resources. If I have
Hmm.
comparative advantage in one product, given my natural resources, I can export to another country that doesn't have that comparative advantage. So any policy against mobility of food, of course, of trade, will have a consequence of the efficiency in the system. So that means that we are moving into a second best world. No? Now, in that world, the tariffs of one country will depend also on the reaction of the other country, the
Sure.
retaliation of another country over that tariff. So it's very difficult to assess the impacts. Even up to today, it's not clear yet what are the agreements that
Right.
are put in place. So the consequence of that is uncertainty. And uncertainty will have an impact in the future. It will have an impact in investment, and it could have an impact in production and productivity. And we need to look at that carefully. But at this point, it's very difficult to assess the net effect over hunger. We know that there could be a negative effect on hunger, but still we cannot quantify that properly because it will depend on the different policies put by other countries. So if we go into a war, a tit for tat of retaliation to tariffs put by
Right.
one country by another country, of course that will exacerbate the situation.
Sure.
We saw what happened in 2007, 2008 with rice, for
Right.
example, when that
Right.
happened and how prices spike. But if that is not the case, we will see what will happen. Now, it's important also to understand that there are the short-term consequences, but then there are the medium and long-term consequences. And those could be more affecting investments, could be more affecting long-term revenues, and that's something that we also need to assess.
I know I'm asking you to predict the future, and that's very difficult right now given the uncertainty. I want to go back to youth for just one moment. There are a lot of benefits that come from investing in youth and agriculture. Can you just sort of talk a little bit about what that means to our listeners?
No, I think what we need to understand is that the agri-food system requires a reduction of asymmetry of information, a reduction of information on prices, information on technologies, all what we normally try to do through extension services. Now, if you are a farmer that doesn't know how to read and write, it's very difficult for this farmer to absorb this information.
Right.
What we know is that younger generations, kids, have at least gone through primary school, so they know how to read and write, and some of them, of course, to secondary school. Second, we know that as a result of that, they are more used to digital technologies, being prepaid phones or being phones with service, and also when they have access to internet. So that means that these young generations could help these farmers, which are of a older generation, as a bridge to translate the information and to be able to help them to use this information properly. Now, some years ago, we tried this. We had a program called Happy Faces.
Hmm.
And we basically work with kids in school, in secondary school, because 11 to 13 is crucial for the span of attention of kids. We started by providing them information on what they could do to improve their nutrition. And basically, it was to take an iron pill in a health center. And we figured out that the message given by the soccer player was the best,
Of
relative to
course.
messages by the nurse or by other people.
Sure.
So kids immediately took and went and picked up this pill and improved their nutrition, reduced their in that time was lack of iron, so they were anemic, and that has a result over the impact of knowledge capabilities. So then we said, okay, so clearly these kids are capturing the messages, and we have the messenger. No? Then we went to the plots of these kids, and we tried to understand what were the problems of their plots, because this was in rural areas. These were kids that had to walk 2 or 3 hours to go to school. And we found the major problems in agriculture that their families have. And then we started giving them videos of resolving these problems at a low cost, very simple solutions to those problems. And what we found is that the kids were able to transfer this information to the parents. So this intergenerational mobility of information and working with younger generations as the bridges
Sure.
to transfer this information is crucial. So I am always a firm believer that we can break one of the major challenges that we have today of lack of capabilities and capacities because of my initial condition, the lack of education, the lack of resources, by working with the younger generations. The second thing that I think is more on the action that countries need to do, we need to convert this agri-food system into something attractive, no?
Hmm. Hmm.
To be able to bring these young generations into a profession that they will love. And when I look at my country, Peru, for example, and I look at the coast of Peru, which has gone through a huge transformation of agro exports, we are top exporters in avocados, in mangoes, in many products right now. I see that today the better paid job is agribusiness in Peru, meaning that we are building this generation of young people coming from the agrarian university that are being demanded by this sector. And you see, all of them are young. So I think governments needs to start to invest to attract
Sure.
that. And I was happy to see Tanzania was trying to do that. They were developing an area, giving land to young people to create this. So many countries can accelerate this process. Of course, they will have to do initial investments, but I think we also need to find ways to attract these young generations into the agri-food system.
Absolutely. You mentioned technology as one way to attract them into agri-food systems. Can you talk about how AI will attract youth and, maybe impact levels of hunger?
Yeah, no, look, Artificial intelligence is a technology that is moving extremely fast. No, I always call it a wild horse, which is moving very fast.
Right, right,
Our job is to try not to avoid using the horse because the horse is going to be there and it's going to bring a lot of solutions. Our job is to try to find ways in which we can drive this horse and we can benefit from it as much as possible. No? So our job right now is okay, what do we like in this agri-food system? Where are the major problems of the most vulnerable farmers? Is lack of information. So
right,
a big farmer can do precision farming because they have access to satellite information. They have big tractors that can do soil analysis, and the next day they know exactly what combination of NPK they need to put. The poorer farmers don't have access to those technologies. So our job as an international organization that generates public goods is to try to provide those public goods so that these farmers can be as precise as possible in the way because they are the most budget constrained. So if somebody needs to
sure.
have precision farming, it's smallholders and medium holders. So that's our job, to try to find ways in which we can use artificial intelligence, digital technology, spatial information through satellite information, and try to get as close as possible to these farmers the information that they will need to make as precise as possible decisions so that they can compete in the same level with the farmers that have the capacity to pay for this type of equipment. I am a firm believer that we can do that. Even if I look at the models being used by the big tractor companies, I think we can use better models even than those. So we're working on that intensively. But again, I think that will make agriculture very attractive to young generations. It will allow them to have state-of-the-art technologies. Today with a good system of information, you can take a picture of your plant, see the problem, and then a digital doctor can tell you what to do within
Right.
the coordinates of your location. So it's no longer a generic solution because I will know exact coordinates of where the problem is, the climate, and so on and so forth. So those are the types of public good investments that we need to accelerate, and where we hope we can get the resources to be able to accelerate that to farmers, and that will bring and attract young generations to work in this sector.
Absolutely. And you talked about, AI's impact on agri-food systems, but it could also help predict, where the climate is sort of
Yes.
going, right?
Oh, for sure. We just launched a facility which is called FSFC, which is basically a facility that has 12 risks. Six of those are climatic, six of those are non-climatic, six of those are insurable, and six are not insurable. For
Hmm.
example, we have extreme temperatures, water stress, we have locusts, and so on and so forth. And we also have conflict, no? Which is also a problem. Now, the issue is, of course, it's very difficult to ensure conflict, but at least we can start building the risk profiles of conflict because today we have the tools through different technologies of starting to predict conflict. We're not talking of wars, we're talking
Hmm.
of conflict, internal conflict in many
Hmm.
parts of Africa. But we, of course, have enough data today to predict El Nino, La Nina, to predict water stress, to predict flooding, even to predict cyclones. No? And that's where we have to invest because with all this massive amount of data, the use of artificial intelligence, the use
Right.
of satellite data, we can have better predictive power. Now, why is this so important? Because if I can tell you in advance, a few weeks or a month, of El Niño or La Niña, then you can do anticipatory action. You can plan before it happens. And that
Right.
means that you can really have returns of 1 to 7. Every dollar invested, 7 of return because you can clean the
Nice.
rivers, you can move people if needed. The same with a cyclone. If you know when the cyclone is going to touch, then you can have few days in advance to give money to people to do the things that they need to do to protect their houses, to
Sure.
protect their crops. And also, the other important thing is that if you have very good models, then you can insure. And if you can insure and work with reinsurance companies, then that means that the money will trigger before the event happens. And this has never happened in insurance before.
Sure.
Insurance pays normally when the event happened. Now we are working with some reinsurance companies, especially Munich Re, to try to do this preventive. So to try to
Right.
trigger the insurance with probabilities of the event happening. When the probability is too high, then they will basically trigger the resources. So I think there is a lot of potential to use these technologies to accelerate these models and to work on that. FAO launched couple of months ago, this facility. We have a situation room. You can log into the webpage, just look at FSFC,
Hmm.
FAO, and you will see the 12 risks and how we are trying to track. But a lot of improvement is needed. Now we are trying to bring also pest and diseases,
Mm.
which will be crucial because we have a lot of information on that and we can help. We are very good right now at locusts, for example. No?
Right.
We can predict locusts with few months in advance. And now we are working to try to do the risk profile so that we can also build an insurance on that.
So you are trying to predict the future. I like it very much. Maximo, you've talked a lot about, the cascading crises that we're sort of facing, the climate crisis, inflation, conflict, not just wars, inflation, of course. Do you have a call to action as we wrap up for governments around the world? Where would you like to see them, tr start trying to invest in agriculture?
Yeah, no, look, I think we're in a tipping point, no? In the sense that in some parts of the world we are seeing improvements, substantial improvements. But in some parts of the world we are seeing substantial deterioration. So I think there is the first time that we can really learn from each other and trying to what we call to don't make the same mistakes that has been done in the past in other parts of the world.
Hmm.
So that for sure is something that we can do. The Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty of the G20 of Brazil, I think is an opportunity to do that. The three pillars, the pillar of best practices, the policy basket, the pillar of financing, the coordination of financing, and the pillar of the action at the country level will allow us to share experiences that will help countries to leapfrog and to accelerate. That's one element. So I think we need to take very seriously this opportunity and to also put pressure on the coordination of the financing of the international financial organizations, because that's where the money is right now. No longer in the countries, it's more on the financial organizations. And we need to find ways to coordinate that better so that we are more effective. Second, I think it's very important for governments to try to prioritize what they are going to use their money,
Mm,
because their money is more restricted as ever. And it's a time to be very efficient and effective in how we allocate the resources that they have, because these should be taken as catalytic resources. It's important to use them efficiently, and that's the repurposing
right.
agenda of support to agriculture, where we need to assess what is there, what needs to go, and where we need to accelerate and put more investment because it will have a bigger return. Third, I think there is no transformation without the private sector. So it's essential that we work with the private sector. But here we need two things. We need a change of the private sector on how they operate.
Hmm.
They need to learn how to operate better with countries that are in need and where they could have significant returns. The higher the
Hmm.
risk, the bigger the returns.
Hmm.
And they should not be expecting that everything should be de-risking.
Sure.
So there are two types of de-risking, at least in my conception. One is money, of course, but the second one is information. So they should combine both the information, the risking, and the money. But they need to put and take some risks. It's not acceptable at this point that the private sector doesn't take risks. I think it's really important that they take risks, especially in the most vulnerable countries. And finally, we need to understand that the African continent, where the change needs to happen and where we need to accelerate action now, and that's the call that we are doing very strongly with SOFI 2025, is a continent that has debt stress, which means that they don't have access to financial markets, very difficult, very super expensive.
Hmm.
It's a continent which is food import dependent, and therefore they are more vulnerable to prices, and they are more vulnerable to monetary policies that will affect their exchange rate. So it's not only the price effect, it's also the exchange rate, and they have a lot of conflict. And as a result of that, they are super more vulnerable to climate because any climate shock will affect them more because they don't have the capacity of resilience. So we need to help those countries to accelerate that process. We need to find innovative solutions to reduce the debt stress, like, for
Right.
example, value in the natural capital, so that will increase the GDP and will reduce the debt to GDP ratio, so that they can have better access to finance. But we also need to work intensively to find ways in which climate financing is attracted to support this continent so that we can accelerate the process. But it will have to be a responsibility of their governments also to accelerate this change.
Yeah, no one can do this alone, can they, Maximo?
Yes, no one.
For more information about the Sophie report, folks can go to FAO.org. Maximo, thank you so much for your work. I look forward to seeing you at Climate Week, but thank you again.
No, a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much.